sometimes when you communicate, you need to suspend the outcome in order for you to do it authentically. Because if you're gonna communicate and you want to see the outcome, it makes you manipulative in some cases, and it doesn't make you genuine. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode between myself, Nwekezi, and my friend Masatero. We've been gone for a while, so please forgive us for that. So yeah, we just thought we should just come back and then just broach the topic of communication. I think when we're talking about communication, it's such a thing that we think we do it quite easily so. We think we engage in it daily, day in and day out, but do we actually? Do we actually communicate with each other? And maybe the answer is yes. And the second question, do we do that effectively? We don't know. So I just wanted to just come here with Masero and we just unpack it. Unpack it as simply as we can, as one person to another. And obviously, if we're missing anything, please do let us know. Let us know what your thoughts on communication are, what nuggets of wisdom you've got, if you've got any tools that can help, if you've got stories that have sort of like taking you back and you're just like, oh, I did this poorly back then. Because I know when I've had this conversation with people and myself, I've always thought I was right. And then it turns out I was wrong in the most cases. As you learn in communication, it's not about being right, it's sometimes just being about understood. But we're very tempted to feel right as people. But yeah, enough rambling from me. I think I'm just going to chuck the question to you, Masejo. What do you think
Okay.
communication is?
So hi guys. Yeah, like MK was saying, life has been lifing, so we have kind of disappeared for a bit, but we're back and back to talk about communication. So sure, as always, I think this is quite a dense topic or a dense word, right? Because what I deem to be communication most of the time is not going to be what you think communication is. So if you had to ask me my definition of communication or what I see communication as is me, whatever it is that I have to say, then putting it out to you. So whether it's my feelings, whether it's, whatever it is, but I think that for me, an important element is feeling that I have expressed myself, right? Then it's kind of how either you respond or don't respond kind of then dictates, you know, one is a communication and what sort of communication is it? So if you were to ask me my thoughts of what communication is Masako expressing how she feels, Masako saying that, today is not a great day. Maybe going more into depths in terms of what's affected that. But yeah, that's my definition, MK. I know my definition and yours are probably not completely aligned. So, what would you say communication is for you?
Sure. Look, I have nothing against your definition. Genuinely don't. But as you have highlighted, we generally do have different definitions for the same thing. So for me, communication is being able to engage in a dialogue with someone. Communication for me is when two people want to seek an understanding. I want to understand Masejo's point of view, and I want to help Masejo understand my point of view. For me, that's communication. It's basically getting to a state where you're able to influence a situation. Um, so I
Okay.
think where I potentially just differ with you a little bit, I think communication goes a little bit more than expressing oneself. I believe there's a difference between expressing yourself and engaging in communication with yourself. So I can tell you, hey, listen, um, what you did back then, whatever, like you drinking my coffee was inappropriate, and I didn't like how that made me feel. I believe that's expressing oneself. I don't think that's communication. I think expressing oneself opens the door for communication. I think where we start getting into communication is now the respondent. Like, what's the respondent going to do? Because it's that dialogue, that back and forth for me is what I believe communication to be. Not too sure if that makes sense or if I don't know, of overcomplicated this thing, which is very possible.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's yeah. Look, but at the end of the day, that's your definition, and that's what you understand it to be. But what I wanted to ask, and as you were speaking, what came into my mind is then essentially we are already breaking up effective and ineffective communication,
Correct.
right? Because I have communicated, whether effectively or not, is where the question mark lies.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, by your definition, if I don't get you to understand what I'm communicating, if that dialogue isn't happening, then it's ineffective, right? But either way, and we can agree to disagree. I've communicated.
No, look, so I'll agree, right? So I'm not disputing that. So it's sort of like saying I don't know how to love someone because my partner doesn't love me back. That's weird. I think you can communicate effectively, and obviously, if the respondent is not interested in understanding what you have to say, that's not on you. I think that's a them thing, and they need to walk that journey by themselves. So in that regard, I'm with you 100%. I think for me, it's a matter of it's difficult. I think when I look at it for myself, I've always asked myself, have I really communicated or have I expressed myself? And maybe it delves into that, have I communicated effectively or have I communicated ineffectively? Right. So I've always like asked myself the question is like, all right, have I communicated in such a way where I seek to be understood or I seek to be right? Because I think that changes the tone of how you communicate to the next person. If you get where I'm going with that. So that for me is like, am I able to sit in a dialogue with Masitejo and literally be as vulnerable as possible in the sense that I don't bring my own prejudices, my own hurt feelings, my own resentment, or my own bitterness that's going to cloud how I receive what Nasir was saying to me. Am I able to sort of be present in the conversation and what you've just highlighted and expressed to me in order for me to want to be curious enough to understand so I can speak on that level and not speak on of the level of get this person, like waiting to just get you, if that makes sense. And that's why I wanted us to sort of like unpack it, because I think if communication really was that simple, I mean, I don't think we'd have as much misunderstandings or conflicts as what we do right now as a people, if that makes sense. That's why I just want us to unpack it.
Yeah. I think you highlighted very important points, especially in terms of perspective, right? And projection.
Yeah.
Because what I communicate to you today may be exactly the same as what I communicate, a day or two from today. But one, where are you coming from when I deliver that communication to you? Where am I coming from? How am I delivering it? So I think it's also a very almost it's a moving target almost all the time. Right. And I've got to be able to maybe read the room, maybe be able to read you at that point to say, today he's not in a joking mood. So when I communicate something, I've got to be cognizant of, being a little bit more serious, where with other times I can come and, it can be banter and it can be joking. It can be taken very differently. So I think there's lots of complexities within communication, but I think that's a big complex factor for me is it's almost like on a day-to-day judging and being mindful of not only where you are when you communicate something or how you communicate something, but how is the person receiving it? And then is that sort of giving us a point of he's understanding what I'm saying and I've delivered in a manner that helps him, really put himself in my position, for example, so that we're able to get to a point where, okay, cool, I hear what you have to say. So I think that can also be quite a complex part of it is it's almost like a day-to-day thing where you've got to navigate all the time. And I think the hard thing or one of the hardest relationships, I think just interpersonal relationships are difficult generally. But I think in long-term marriages, long-term relationship, not necessarily a marriage, when you have a partner, or I think we fall into the habit of not necessarily being mindful of where that person is. I'm used to always being in a good mood, so that's how I'm always going to communicate, right? And then not necessarily taking the time to understand if he's taken what I've said, how it's meant, right? And then I'm like, oh, but I was joking. Why are you taking things seriously? And I think that can be quite difficult because you get so used to how someone is, but the reality is we're ever evolving, right? I go to work today, I have a horrible day where something you say to me hits a lot differently to what it, would other times. So how do you navigate through that on a constant basis?
Yeah. What I love about what you've just said. I think you touched on something so important, that the first step of communication in most cases is self-awareness and awareness of self. I think if you're aware of your own prejudices and your own and your own guilt, I think it's your responsibility to work on those. I'm not saying it will be a perfect system, because that's not possible. What I mean by that is, if now I'm aware of my own stuff, all right, I think it's easier to be aware of other people's stuff, if that makes sense. I think once you start learning self-awareness, social awareness sort of follows, because now you're aware. So even if I do say something, Masero, like let's say, I don't know, I make a joke that I always make, and then on that day, you're just not in it. I think it's easier for me to have that conversation. Sorry, man, I didn't mean for you. I didn't mean for it to come across in that way. Really wasn't the intention type thing. I think it's easier to communicate such things if you yourself are aware of yourself. You're not gonna, because I think one of the enemies of communication is defensiveness. I'm not going to be defensive because you took it the wrong way, because I understand who I am and I understand that that wasn't my intention. And because of that awareness, I'm able to separate your feelings from mine, if that makes sense. So just because you've reacted poorly, I'm not going to call into question the intentions that I had with what just happened. I'm open to having a conversation about it and being able to communicate for the future and saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Now I know. Now I know when you've got a certain look on your face that it's not appropriate to make this joke, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Because once we have that space, it opens up. Oh, sorry about that. Once we have that space, I think there's an intimacy that gets birthed from understanding oneself and understanding the next person. And then at some point, you'll also calm down afterwards, like, yeah, no, but this guy, that's not who he is, though. And then you also trust that it's okay for you to come and have that conversation. Listen, I reacted poorly in that one. It really wasn't on you, it was on me. Because it happens. It really happens. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to speak to the last point you're saying, that it takes that big element of me owning that, usually that wouldn't offend me. And the fact that it has, I maybe then need to approach you and just let you know. And that's where, like you're saying, sort of we've built that relationship, but it's the onus is then on me. And I think that's a big part, is we almost, especially when you're not feeling good, or especially when you feel you've been offended, a lot of the time we don't take the onus to say, Moketsi, this is how I feel, or this is how you offended me, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. We almost expect you, or have that assumption that you would know that you affected me in a negative way, because you could just see the look on my face. And I think there's also that layer where there's always that, but you should know. Yeah. How do I know if you've never vocalized it to me?
Yeah.
Right. But then, and I think in relationships, it's like, but if I don't respond how I usually should, or I usually do, you should know that I'm not okay. And I think that's also where it becomes quite difficult, because it's always like, I need to check myself, and I need to check you. I need to make sure you're in the right space. You've taken it on. And it's just, that can be exhausting. So a big part of communication is always, what part did I play in the miscommunication?
Yeah. That's hard. How do you answer that question for yourself without being kind of defensive about it?
Defensive? No, you can't. That was my first thing. I went into defense mode because I'm like, but I didn't say anything wrong. Not realizing the tone sometimes is probably just the only thing that was wrong in that thing or that statement, that I said it to you in a particular tone. What I said might not have been off or incorrect, but just how I delivered it.
Mm.
But yeah. I mean, when I think of this conversation, and it's a conversation we had earlier on, is the banter, the way you communicate with certain people is very different throughout all the people that you communicate with. And if somebody else steps into a situation, so for example, I've got a colleague where we will make fun of each other. We will, and that's our banter. That's just, we're cool. That's how it is. When another person stepped into that conversation, she was literally taken aback. She was like, yo, so much shade. Like, are you guys okay? And we looked at her, we were like, what are you talking about? We're laughing the whole time and we are mute, like that's how we communicate.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting when you start seeing and hearing this from other people's perspective that, our communication is very different depending on who we speak to and depending, what the context is. And I think that's the other thing about communication. It's very individual.
Yes.
And it's like you're building these individual communication boxes with everybody that you interact with all the time.
Yeah. So that's actually very important. And I think you're very right. I mean, like how you and I would communicate is vastly different from how, I don't know, my wife and I would communicate or how you and your husband would communicate. And I've found that, well, it's a trick that for myself, I don't always get it right, but I try my best. If I find myself in the space needing to open the lines of communication, I always ask myself the question, what's the point? What's the point of what I'm about to say? And I think I found it much easier to hold that grace and that space for that collaboration when I want to communicate this for the sake of influencing, for the sake of I either need to get you to do something, or I need to influence your perspective in a certain direction, because that enables me to stay curious and to understand. But what's the barrier for you not to see it this way, or for you not to do this? Because it's easy for me to sort of be like, Masego, I need you to do A, B, and C, and you're like, sorry, can't do it now because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I can negotiate with you because now I've expressed a need, right? And because it's a safe space, we can negotiate. Because now I'm not thinking you're being unruly, being rude. I'm like, okay, so you can't do it at XYZ. Is it possible to do it at 4, 5, 6, whatever? You're like, yes, great, we're done. But if now I'm in the space where my communication is to coerce you, is to rule you, I can't accept anything but an agreement from you. So that's not communication in most cases. That's an instruction. Like if I'm like, Masego, I really
But
didn't.
it's still communication.
Sorry?
But it's still communication.
But for what purpose?
Okay. I hear you. But, okay, I suppose then we're going to the definitions which we kind of differ on. So, sorry, continue with your point.
Yeah, so I think so I get it's still communication, but it's more, that's an instruction. I think, guys, we've got different words for a reason.
Yeah.
So I think I'm fixed on the communication, the dialogue type thing, because we could literally coerce people into doing something. That's not effective.
100%.
You get what I mean? You've got a way, but
Yeah.
it's not really effective. Like if I say to you, Masego, you really hurt my feelings, and if the point of that is to influence your perspective on what just happened, I'm open enough to hear you say, all right, I hear you. This is why I acted A, B, and C, D, E. Then I can retort without now losing it or whatever the case may be. Because I think once you get into that space of coercion, that space of you need to see it this way, I in that moment won't be open-minded enough to hear what you're saying and understand that maybe what you're telling me is you're telling me for the sake of context, and then you're not making an excuse. Because I think there's a difference between the two. So I can hear you saying like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I have context as to why you were acting A, B, and C. Still, we can have that conversation and try to correct it. But I'm like, look, I hear you and I understand why you would act that way. But in future, can we please be mindful of A, B, and C, or it infringes on a boundary or on a value or whatever the case may be. But I think if we're not open and if we're already been ruled by how you're feeling, and I'm not saying you're not allowed to be, but it can't dominate the conversation. I think then we potentially lose it from a communication perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you touched on a nerve there, and I don't think we'll go into it in another episode in terms of the emotional aspect. But I wanted to agree with you know, and I think for a lot of things, not only with communication, it's that why. Like if you don't know what the purpose of you saying something is, if that isn't clear from the onset, then it's like what's the purpose? What are you doing? What are you trying to get out of it? And going back to what you spoke about, either commanding somebody or whatever it is. So if you can figure out from the onset what you're trying to get out when communicating with another person, I think it already sets the tone in terms of how I'm going to communicate it. So if I'm trying to hurt you, it's going to affect my tone. It's going to affect maybe the speed at which I say something to you. Or if I'm trying to be motivational, then whatever, the pitch will be lower. I'll maybe be, saying whatever I say a lot slower. So I think it is very important. But as you were speaking as well, something that came to me, and I don't know if we'll be able to go into it now, and something maybe to look at in another conversation is not communicating is also communicating.
No, 100%.
So, yeah, so silent treatment, and I think that's something that a lot of people use. Maybe they don't weaponize it. I don't know if weaponize is the right word, but if I'm not talking to you what that means. But I think the sad part is there's so much lost in that because so much, yes, maybe you need to sort of step away, regroup, think about what you wanted to say, maybe structure it in a more conducive way, especially if we're trying to move forward or we're trying to resolve a problem. But I think oftentimes we can get lost in, me keeping quiet is going to show him, right? And then I lose what I actually wanted to communicate initially, because now my focal point is, it's fine, we don't have to talk for a couple of weeks. But in that not talking, I'm communicating a whole lot, and I'm maybe using my body language a lot more than what I usually would do. So, it all goes back to the why and what your intention is, but definitely the non-communication is also a huge communication tool, and I think we all use it very well when we need to, but I think it can also be effective in, do we always have to speak? Do I always have to make my point known? Because I think sometimes you've got to be able to, and this is very situational, right? You've got to be able to decide, would it make a difference, right? And I don't think so much in relationships, because I think it is important to always voice your thoughts, voice your opinions. But I think, and maybe this could be in the corporate world, for example, where me voicing my opinion, me communicating to you won't change anything. So do I then at that point choose to not communicate?
It depends.
And what happens?
That sounds like a defense mechanism to me, but I guess that's also quite situational. Because sometimes we communicate because we have made the call that it's pointless, and you don't know that. You don't. The only thing you're relying on is experience of yesterday. You have no idea if this is the one conversation that could actually turn out differently. You have no idea. You've decided and you have made that call. And I get. Sometimes you've got so much experience behind you. But if you're saying there's no point, that's a defense mechanism. You've made a call based on a negative experience that you're having internally. You don't know. you just don't. Because sometimes for me, when I communicate so you understand where I'm at. I don't need you to affirm, believe, approve. I don't need you to do that. And I think I'm past it. I'm past communicating to hope there's a good outcome. Sometimes when we communicate, we really need to suspend our need for the outcome to look a certain type of way, right? Because I think when we force the outcome and we want it to look a certain type of way, we become manipulative. And when we become manipulative, we lose the authenticity and the genuineness that comes from what we really wanted to say. Because now I want my Sarah to sort of like me after this conversation, because that's what the point is. And sometimes that will prevent you from being a genuine person because you're afraid of the outcome. Like, now, if I say this, what if my circle sort of like budges and be like, no, to hell with this person? So sometimes it's that not communicating and not having like that defense mechanism and deciding already. Because if we don't do that, if we don't learn to sort of let go of the outcome, we become manipulative. And when we don't get our way because we're not being genuine to ourselves, we build up resentment. And that resentment can look like giving a person a silent treatment because your words are not enough. So therefore, let me access my behavior that will help me get this point across in a way that clearly, verbally, I can't influencing you to doing, not realizing that actually makes the situation worse. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
By the way, we're still communicating.
Yeah.
So I think this has been an awesome start of a very big conversation. What's your communication style? What works for you in certain situation? What's your definition of communication? Let us know what your thoughts are, what your comments are. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Because I think this is a very big topic that we could go on for many, 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 many episodes. So let us know what works for you when it comes to communication. What communication styles do you have in different situations? Looking forward to all the comments or all the conversations that we can have around this. MK, as always, thought-provoking conversations. I think what's always interesting is our perspective is very different. Same, but different.
Same. It's a very different same.
It's a very different thing. And I think what's nice is that a lot of people, whether they connect with what I have to say or they connect with you, this really allows for lots of conversations to happen and a lot of more communication to be understood. Because I think sometimes we just take things sort of on surface level and we don't really allow ourselves to start digging deeper. So yeah, let's continue to dig deep and have more and more of these communication and conversations.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks. Bye.